On November 1st, 1396, inside a magnificent cathedral in the heart of London, the solemn sound of the organ echoed through the vaulted space, filling it with reverence. Yet amid all the grandeur, the figure walking toward the altar was not a young woman of marriageable age, but a child only 6 years old. That child was Isabel of France, a tiny princess carrying on her shoulders the crushing weight of a diplomatic treaty, forced into marriage with King Richard II of England, a man 23 years her senior. What seemed to be a splendid royal wedding was, in truth, a cold act of political theatre. Isabel, draped in a gown of heavy gold fabric and crowned with a diadem far too large for her head, nearly buckled under the weight of responsibilities she could not possibly comprehend. To Europe, this was a milestone of fragile peace. To the child, it was confusion and fear in the midst of a sea of strangers. How a little girl could become England's child queen. Let us return to Paris, to the court where Isabel was born, a realm sinking into madness and torn apart by struggles for power. Isabel was born on the 9th of November 1389 at the Louvre Palace in Paris. She was the fourth daughter of Charles VI of France and Isabeau of Bavaria. From the moment of her birth, her world was clouded by instability. Her father, Charles VI, was later remembered not as a wise or heroic king, but as Charles the Mad. At only 24 years old, he began to suffer terrifying episodes of mental collapse. Sometimes he did not recognize his own wife and children. Sometimes he believed he was made of fragile glass, convinced that even a touch would shatter him. On other occasions, he fled down the corridors of his palaces, screaming about invisible enemies. France's government lurched into chaos as regents and powerful dukes wrestled for control, while the king himself spent long periods locked inside the labyrinth of his mind. Isabel's mother, Queen Isabeau, proved little comfort. Contemporary chroniclers painted her as calculating, ambitious, and scandalous. She was accused of neglecting her children while indulging in wealth, luxury, and lovers. To her, daughters were not beloved companions, but bargaining chips to secure alliances or to refill the royal treasury. This was the environment in which little Isabel grew up, a court torn apart by war and factional rivalries, with a father who terrified her and a mother who viewed her as a tool. It was a childhood shaped not by warmth but by cold calculation. The backdrop of Isabel's life was the 100 Years' War, the seemingly endless struggle between France and England. On French soil, rival factions, the Armagnacs and Burgundians, also clashed violently, exploiting the king's madness for their own political gain. For a child in the royal nursery, these were not abstract concerns. Every outbreak of violence threatened her safety. Every political shift changed her value as a diplomatic prize. And at 6 years old, the prize was about to be claimed. By the mid-1392s, Richard II of England faced desperate circumstances. His reign had been rocked by rebellion, his finances were strained, and his authority was challenged. He had recently lost his first wife, Anne of Bohemia, whom he loved deeply, and now sought stability through another marriage. Across the Channel, French advisors saw an opportunity. They proposed that Richard marry Isabel of France. In exchange, France would provide an enormous dowry, 800,000 francs, and more importantly, agree to a truce lasting 28 years. For England, peace with France offered Richard breathing room against his rivals at home. For France, crippled by debt and weary of war, the truce was invaluable. The problem was Isabel's age. 6 years old, she was far younger than the typical minimum age of 12, considered suitable for consummating marriage. Some English voices argued to wait until she matured, but Richard was too pressed for time. He needed the money, the alliance, and the image of peace. The deal was sealed. In October 1396, after months of negotiations, Isabel was formally betrothed to the English king. Soon after, she travelled across the Channel with a glittering entourage. Her farewell at the Louvre was staged with pomp to impress the English ambassadors. In a rare moment of clarity, her father Charles VI wept openly as he blessed her. Her mother, cold and pragmatic, treated the event as a successful business arrangement. The little princess left France with a handful of toys, her favorite dolls, and even a small dog. For her, the journey may have seemed like an adventure, though she likely did not understand that she was being permanently removed from her homeland. The procession across England was marked by pageantry in every town. Nobles and civic leaders welcomed her with feasts and gifts, while she, exhausted and overwhelmed, often cried and asked to go home. When the wedding day arrived, St. Paul's Cathedral was adorned with intertwined French and English banners. Thousands of candles bathed the Gothic arches in golden light. Choirs sang in Latin, while nobles in silks and furs filled the pews. But at the center of this spectacle was a small girl, dwarfed by the grandeur around her. When the Archbishop of Canterbury placed the wedding ring on her finger, he had to kneel to reach her tiny hand. Richard, nearly 30 years old, stood beside her, visibly awkward. Chroniclers noted that he treated Isabel more like a daughter, promising not to consummate the marriage until she came of age. For the moment, she was a queen in name but still a child in reality. In England, Isabel was housed in comfort. She was given her own apartments at Westminster, servants devoted to her care, and tutors from France to ease her transition. Richard ensured she was treated with dignity, even allowing her to maintain elements of her French identity. Her role was largely ceremonial. She appeared beside Richard at public events, a symbol of peace between two rival nations. Yet she was too young to wield any true influence. Ironically, these were perhaps her most stable years. Though married in name, she was spared the harsher realities of adult life. But fate, as always, was merciless. In 1399, political turmoil swept through England once again. Richard II was overthrown by his cousin, Henry Bolingbroke, who became Henry IV. Richard was imprisoned and later died under suspicious circumstances, likely murdered at Pontefract Castle. Isabel, only 10 years old, was suddenly a widow. Her marriage had never been consummated, and she had no children. But she was still Queen of England in title, and her massive dowry had already been absorbed into the English crown. Henry IV faced a dilemma. Returning Isabel to France would mean returning money that England no longer possessed. At first, he attempted to keep her in England, effectively as a bargaining chip for future diplomacy. Thus began 3 years of captivity for the child queen. She was housed in relative comfort at Havering Palace, but her freedom was denied. In her letters to her family, preserved by chroniclers, she wrote with a maturity born of suffering, "I am kept here like a prisoner, far from all I love, without hope of return." Eventually, pressure from the French court forced Henry to relent. In 1401, Isabel was returned to her homeland. By then, she was 12 years older, more solemn, and visibly changed by her ordeal. But her homecoming brought little joy. France was still engulfed in civil conflict. Her mother viewed her less as a daughter returned than as another political pawn to be played. 4 years later, in 1405, Isabel was married once again, this time to Charles, Duke of Orléans, a sensitive young nobleman with literary talent. For once, it seemed that Isabel had found affection. Their marriage was by all accounts warmer and more genuine than her first. They shared an interest in poetry and art, and the young couple appeared to have built a bond beyond politics. This fragile happiness was short-lived. In 1407, Charles was captured by the English at the Battle of Agincourt and imprisoned for more than 2 decades. Isabel, not yet 18, was effectively widowed once more. She bore one daughter, Joan of Orléans, in 1409. But soon after the birth, Isabel suffered complications. She died later that same year, at only 20 years old. Her life, scarcely begun, had been consumed by politics. A child bride, a widow at 10, a captive at 12, remarried at 16, widowed again in practice by 18, and dead by 20. Isabel of France left little mark on the chronicles of her age. Her death was scarcely recorded, a quiet end to a life that had once been paraded before the courts of Europe. Yet her story reveals much about the world she inhabited. In the brutal chessboard of medieval politics, Daughters of kings were pawns to be sacrificed. Childhood meant nothing against the demands of treaties and truces. The grandeur of her wedding masked a disturbing truth. Europe's peace had been bought with the happiness of a child. Today, Isabel's fate resonates as a reminder of how political ambition can consume innocence. She was never allowed to grow into her role at her own pace. From the moment she could walk, her path was mapped by others. Behind the pageantry of her coronation and the pomp of her marriage lay the quiet tragedy of a girl who never truly had a childhood.